The wind cut through her layers of wool and cotton like a butcher's knife through soft flesh, and Natalie Jameson knew that if she stopped moving, she would die out here in the white hell that had become Wyoming territory in the winter of 1878. Her stepfather's voice still echoed in her ears from 3 hours ago, slurred with whiskey and thick with intentions that made her stomach turn. She had grabbed her mother's old cloak, the one thing of value she owned, and run into the gathering storm rather than stay another moment in that cabin. Her mother had been dead 6 months now, and Richard Coltrane had made it clear what he expected from the 19-year-old girl he no longer considered a daughter. The bruise on her cheek throbbed in the freezing air, a parting gift when she had refused his advances and shoved past him toward the door. The blizzard had started as light flurries when she fled, but now the snow fell so thick she could barely see 5 feet ahead. Natalie had hoped to make it to the neighboring ranch, the Patterson place, maybe 8 miles from their isolated homestead. But she had lost her bearings in the whiteout, and her legs were growing heavy, unresponsive. Her fingers had gone numb an hour ago, and now she could not feel her feet inside her worn boots. She stumbled over something buried in the snow and went down hard on her hands and knees. The cold bit through her skirts, soaking them instantly. "Get up," she told herself. "Get up or you will freeze to death right here." But her body would not obey. The wind howled around her like a living thing, and Natalie felt tears freeze on her eyelashes. She had escaped one death only to find another. The darkness crept in at the edges of her vision, and she collapsed forward into the snow. It felt almost warm now, which some distant part of her mind recognized as a very bad sign. She thought of her mother, of the stories she used to tell about heaven, and wondered if she would see her again soon. She did not hear the horse approaching through the storm, did not know that anyone was near until strong hands gripped her shoulders and turned her over. "Jesus Christ," a man's voice said, rough and urgent. "Miss, can you hear me?" Natalie tried to open her eyes, managed only a flutter of her eyelids. Through the blur of white, she saw a face above her, weathered and concerned, dark eyes wide with alarm beneath the brim of a snow-covered hat. "Stay with me now," the voice commanded. "I have got you." She felt herself lifted, felt the warmth of another body as the man pulled her against his chest. The world swayed, and she realized dimly that she was being placed on a horse, held in place by arms that wrapped around her like iron bands. "My cabin is not far," the voice said close to her ear. "You hold on, you hear me? Just hold on a little longer." Natalie tried to respond, but her lips would not move. The cold had sunk too deep into her bones. She felt the horse moving beneath them, felt the man's heart beating strong and steady against her back, and then felt nothing at all. Xavier Ashford had been riding back to his cabin from checking his cattle when he spotted the dark shape in the snow. He had almost missed it, would have ridden right past if his horse, a clever mare named Smoke, had not balked and refused to go forward. When he dismounted to investigate, his heart had nearly stopped at the sight of the young woman collapsed face down in the drifts. Now, as he kicked open the door to his cabin with the woman limp in his arms, he was already calculating what he needed to do. He had seen men with frostbite and hypothermia before, had lost a friend to exposure one brutal winter. She was alive. He could feel her shallow breathing, but she was in bad shape. He laid her on his bed and immediately set to work building up the fire in the hearth. The cabin was cold. He had been gone for hours, but it was a damn sight warmer than outside. Once the fire was blazing, he turned his attention to the woman. Her lips were blue, her skin pale as milk. Ice crystals clung to her dark hair and eyelashes. Xavier knew he had to get her out of the wet clothes. It was a matter of survival, nothing improper about it. though his hands shook slightly as he worked the buttons of her soaked cloak. The fabric was frozen stiff. Her dress underneath was equally wet, and her boots were so packed with snow he had to pry them off carefully. He found blankets, the wool ones he used in winter, and wrapped her in layers, rubbing her arms and legs gently to encourage circulation without causing damage to frozen skin. Her fingers and toes worried him the most. They were white and waxy, classic signs of severe frostbite. He brought a basin of lukewarm water and carefully immersed her hands, watching for any response. She moaned softly, which he took as a good sign. At least she could feel something. As he worked, he found himself studying her face. She was young, probably not more than 20, with delicate features and dark lashes that lay against her two pale cheeks. There was a bruise on her left cheekbone, purple and angry, shaped like someone's knuckles. Xavier's jaw tightened. He had wondered what would drive a woman out into a blizzard alone, and that bruise told him plenty. He spent the next hour warming her slowly, changing out the water for her hands and feet, piling more blankets on her, spooning warm broth between her lips when she was conscious enough to swallow. She drifted in and out, sometimes mumbling words he could not make out, other times lying still as death. It was nearly midnight when her eyes finally opened fully and focused on him. They were green, he noticed, the color of spring grass, and currently filled with confusion and fear. "Where am I?" She whispered, her voice hoarse. "My cabin about 6 miles north of Jackson," Xavier said gently, staying seated in the chair he had pulled up beside the bed. "I found you in the snow. You have been unconscious for hours." Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the rough log walls, the crackling fire, the simple furnishings of a bachelor's dwelling. "I do not know you. Name is Xavier Ashford. I have a ranch here, run cattle mostly. What is your name?" She hesitated, and he saw her calculating, deciding whether to trust him. Finally she said, "Natalie Jameson." "Well, Miss Jameson, you are damn lucky to be alive. What in God's name were you doing out in that storm?" Her face closed off, and she looked away. "I was trying to get somewhere." "Where?" "Away." The single word carried a weight of pain that made Xavier's chest tighten. He glanced at the bruise on her face, then back to her eyes. "Someone hurt you." It was not a question. Natalie's hand moved to her cheek and fresh tears welled up. "I could not stay. I would rather have died out there than stayed another night in that house." Xavier felt a hot surge of anger at whoever had put that fear in her eyes, that desperation in her voice. "You are safe here," he said firmly. "No one is going to hurt you in my home. You have my word on that." She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to judge the truth of his statement. Whatever she saw in his face must have satisfied her because some of the tension left her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saving me. Could not very well leave you out there to freeze." He stood up, suddenly awkward. "You should rest. I will sleep by the fire, give you the bed. There is more broth if you are hungry, and I will make something more substantial in the morning." "Wait," Natalie said as he started to turn away. "My stepfather, Richard Coltrane. If he comes looking for me, please do not tell him I am here." The name was unfamiliar to Xavier, but then he kept mostly to himself and did not spend much time in town. "I will not tell a soul you are here unless you want me to. You have got my word." Relief flooded her face and she sank back into the pillows. "Thank you, Mr. Ashford, Xavier," he corrected. "Seeing as you are my guest and all." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Xavier, thank you." He nodded and retreated to give her privacy, settling himself in a chair near the fire with a blanket. Through the window, the storm still raged, wind howling around the cabin eaves. He thought about the young woman in his bed, about the fear in her eyes when she spoke of her stepfather, about that bruise on her face. Whatever she was running from, Xavier knew it was bad. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he was not going to let anyone drag her back to it. The storm lasted 3 days. During that time, Natalie slowly recovered from her brush with death, though Xavier warned her it would be weeks before they knew if she would lose any fingers or toes to frostbite. The circulation had returned to her extremities, and while they were painful and blistered, he was cautiously optimistic that she would heal without permanent damage. They fell into an easy routine. Xavier slept by the fire and gave Natalie his bed, though she protested repeatedly that she should take the chair. He would not hear of it. He cooked simple meals, mostly beans and salt pork and biscuits, apologizing for the limited fare. She ate everything he put in front of her with an appreciation that suggested she had not been fed well in recent months. They talked, carefully at first, dancing around the painful topics. Xavier learned that Natalie's mother had died of fever the previous summer, that she had no other family, that her stepfather owned a small, struggling homestead south of Jackson. She did not talk about what had happened the night she fled, but she did not need to. The haunted look in her eyes told Xavier everything. He told her about his ranch, about the cattle he was building his herd with, about his plans to expand in the spring. He had come to Wyoming 5 years ago from Texas, looking for a fresh start after the war had taken everything from him. He was 26 now, and this ranch was all he had in the world, but it was his and he was proud of it. On the 4th day, the storm finally broke. The sun came out, blindingly bright against the fresh snow, and Xavier knew he needed to check on his cattle. Many of them would have drifted with the storm, and he had to make sure they had not gotten trapped somewhere or injured. "I need to ride out today," he told Natalie over breakfast. "Check the herd. I will be gone most of the day, but I will be back before dark." Fear flickered across her face. "What if someone comes?" "No one is going to come out here in this snow," Xavier assured her. "The roads are impassable. But if it makes you feel better, I have got a rifle hanging over the door. You know how to shoot." "My father taught me, my real father, before he died when I was 12. Xavier nodded. "Good. Anyone comes to that door who you do not want to see, you shoot first and ask questions later. I will understand." She managed a small smile at that. "I hope it does not come to that. So do I." He saddled Smoke and rode out into the glittering white landscape, his mind divided between worry about his cattle and worry about the woman he had left in his cabin. Natalie Jameson had gotten under his skin in a way he had not expected. She was strong. He could see that in the way she had survived what should have killed her, in the way she pushed through the pain of her recovery without complaint. But there was a softness to her too, a vulnerability that made him want to protect her from every bad thing in the world. He found most of his cattle bunched up in a sheltered valley, cold and hungry but alive. He broke open bales of hay he had stored in a lean-to shelter and watched them eat, counting heads, checking for injuries. He was short a few, but that was to be expected. He would have to ride out farther tomorrow, search for the stragglers. By the time he made it back to the cabin, the sun was setting and his stomach was growling. He could smell something cooking before he even opened the door, and when he stepped inside, warmth and the savory scent of stew enveloped him. Natalie stood at the stove, stirring a pot, her cheeks flushed from the heat. She had found his spare shirt and work pants, rolled up the sleeves and cuffs so they fit her smaller frame, and pinned up her dark hair. She looked utterly at home in his kitchen, and something in Xavier's chest squeezed tight at the sight. "I hope you do not mind," she said quickly, seeing his expression. "I found the vegetables in your cold storage and some dried beef, and I thought I would make myself useful. You have done so much for me, the least I can do is cook. Mind." This smells better than anything I have made in this cabin in 5 years. Xavier hung up his coat and hat, stamping snow from his boots. You did not need to do this, though. You are still recovering. I feel much better, truly, and I was going mad just lying in bed all day. She ladled stew into bowls and brought them to the rough-hewn table. Besides, I need to earn my keep somehow. They ate together, and Xavier could not remember the last time a meal had tasted so good. It was not just the food, though Natalie was clearly a skilled cook. It was the company, the simple pleasure of sharing a table with someone, of not eating alone. After dinner, they sat by the fire and talked late into the night. Natalie told him about her childhood, about her father who had died in an accident at the sawmill, about her mother's grief that had made her vulnerable to a man like Richard Coltrane. She told him about the slow change in her stepfather after the wedding, the drinking that started when his crops failed, the anger that grew with each passing month. He was not always bad, she said softly, staring into the flames. At first he was kind to me, to my mother. But the drink changed him, and after Mama died, there was nothing holding back his true nature. Xavier listened, his hands clenched into fists, wishing he could make this Richard Coltrane pay for every moment of fear he had inflicted on this brave young woman. You cannot go back there, he said when she fell silent. You know that, right? Natalie nodded. I know, but I have nowhere else to go, no money, no family. I had thought if I could just get to town, maybe I could find work, but I do not even know if anyone would hire me. Respectable women do not run away from home, even from stepfathers. People talk. Then stay here, Xavier said before he could think better of it. She looked at him, startled. What? Stay here, on the ranch? I could use the help, honestly. Cooking, mending, all the domestic work I am terrible at. I would pay you fair wages, and you would have a roof over your head and food in your belly. He held up his hands as she opened her mouth to protest. It would be proper. You keep the bedroom. I will build a partition to give you privacy. And come spring, if you want to leave, find something else, I will help you do that. But at least it gives you time to heal, time to figure out what you want to do next. Natalie stared at him, her green eyes wide and shining in the firelight. You would do that for me. You barely know me. I know enough, Xavier said firmly. I know you are brave and strong, and you deserve a chance to build a life that is yours. Let me give you that chance. A tear spilled down her cheek, and she brushed it away quickly. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will stay. Thank you, Xavier. I do not know how I will ever repay your kindness. You already have, he said, nodding at the empty stew pot. Best meal I have had in years. She laughed, the sound bright and unexpected, and Xavier felt something shift inside him, some long frozen part of his heart beginning to thaw. The weeks passed, and Natalie settled into life on the ranch with surprising ease. Her hands and feet healed with no permanent damage, though the blistered skin was tender for a long time. She threw herself into making the cabin more of a home, cleaning and organizing, mending Xavier's worn clothes, cooking meals that made him look forward to the end of each long day. Xavier built a wall of pine boards down the center of the cabin, giving Natalie a private space with the bed and a small dresser he had cobbled together. It was not much, but it gave her somewhere that was hers, and he saw her relax a little more each day. He rode into Jackson once in late January, sold some cattle he had intended to hold until spring because he needed cash to buy supplies. He came back with fabric for a new dress for Natalie, sturdy boots that actually fit her, and a few yards of calico for curtains she had mentioned wanting. The look on her face when he unloaded the packages made the financial sacrifice worth it. You should not have spent your money on me, she protested, but her fingers stroked the fabric reverently. You needed boots that fit, and you cannot keep wearing my old shirt forever. Xavier said gruffly, embarrassed by her gratitude. Besides, I had the money. What he did not tell her was that he had carefully avoided the more populated areas of town, not wanting word to get back to anyone that he had a woman living with him. He knew how people talked, how rumors spread. The last thing Natalie needed was her stepfather hearing she was at his ranch. February brought more snow and bitter cold, but the cabin stayed warm and the work kept them busy. Xavier spent his days tending cattle, mending fences where he could get to them, and chopping endless cords of wood. Natalie cooked and cleaned and started working on the garden plot she wanted to plant come spring, planning what vegetables they could grow. They talked every evening by the fire, conversations that ranged from the practical to the philosophical. Xavier found himself telling her things he had never told anyone, about the war, about watching his family's ranch in Texas burn, about the nightmares that sometimes still woke him in the cold hours before dawn. Natalie listened without judgment, her hand sometimes reaching out to touch his arm in silent comfort. She told him about her dreams too, the ones she had given up on when her father died and her mother remarried. She had wanted to be a teacher once, had loved reading and learning. Xavier found some old books he had tucked away in a trunk, volumes of poetry and a worn copy of Shakespeare, and Natalie devoured them hungrily, sometimes reading passages aloud to him in the evenings. It was during one of these evenings in late February that Xavier realized he had fallen in love with her. She was reading something from Romeo and Juliet, her voice soft and musical in the firelight, and he was not really listening to the words. He was watching the way the flames cast shadows across her face, the way her hair, loose around her shoulders for the evening, gleamed like polished mahogany. He was thinking about how right she looked here in his home, how empty the cabin had felt before she came, how he could not imagine it without her now. The realization should have frightened him. Instead, it filled him with a warm certainty that settled in his chest and stayed there. He did not say anything, not then. It was too soon, he told himself. She was still healing, still finding her feet. The last thing she needed was her employer declaring feelings for her when she was dependent on him for survival. That would not be fair to her. But he could not hide the way his feelings changed how he looked at her, how he found excuses to be near her, how his hand would linger when passing her something at dinner. And he saw, in the way her cheeks flushed when their eyes met, in the soft smiles she gave him, that maybe, just maybe, she felt something too. March came in like a lamb, bringing warmer temperatures and the first signs of thaw. Xavier rode out one morning to check on the cattle and found a newborn calf struggling to stand on wobbly legs, its mother watching with patient eyes. He smiled at the sight, pleased that the calving season was starting strong. When he returned to the cabin that afternoon, he found Natalie in the garden plot, turning over soil with a spade, her face bright with exertion and joy. "The ground is finally soft enough to work," she called out when she saw him. "I can start planting peas and onions soon. And I thought we could build a chicken coop if you think it is a good idea. Fresh eggs would be wonderful." Xavier dismounted and walked over to her, unable to resist the pull of her enthusiasm. "A chicken coop sounds like a fine idea. I can start on it tomorrow." She beamed at him, and he found himself staring at her mouth, at the curve of her lips, wondering what she would do if he kissed her right there in the muddy garden. Instead, he cleared his throat and stepped back, heading to the barn before he did something stupid. But that night at dinner, he could not take it anymore. They were washing dishes together, Natalie scrubbing while Xavier dried when their hands bumped in the soapy water. They both froze, and when Xavier looked at her, he saw his own longing reflected in her eyes. "Natalie," he said hoarsely. "Yes, I need to tell you something." She set down the pot she was holding, turning to face him fully. What is it? Xavier put down the dish towel, his heart pounding. These past few months having you here, they have been the best of my life. You have brought light to this place, to me. And I know I have got no right to say this. I am your employer and you are depending on me, and I will understand if this changes things, but I have got to be honest with you. Her green eyes were wide, fixed on his face. Go on. I am in love with you, Xavier said simply. I have been for a while now, and I am tired of pretending I am not. But if you do not feel the same, we can forget I ever said anything and go on like we have been. Your place here is secure no matter what. I just needed you to know. For a long moment, Natalie said nothing. Then she stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and placed her hand on his chest, right over his racing heart. You are not the only one who has been pretending, she whispered. I have loved you since the day you rode out in the snow to check the cattle and came back worried about me. Since the day you bought me fabric for a dress when I know money is tight. Since every evening we have spent talking by the fire. I love you, Xavier Ashford, and I have been terrified to admit it because I did not want to presume, did not want to ruin what we have here. Xavier's breath caught. You love me. I love you, she confirmed, and her smile was radiant. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing over her cheekbones, careful to avoid the bruise that had long since faded. Can I kiss you, please? She breathed. Xavier lowered his head and kissed her, soft and sweet at first, then deeper as she melted against him. She tasted like the honey cake she had made for dessert, and her lips were warm and soft under his. He wrapped his arms around her waist and pulled her closer, 5 months of longing pouring into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. I want to do this right, he said. Court you properly, marry you if you will have me. I want to give you everything you deserve. Natalie laughed, joy bubbling up from somewhere deep inside. I would marry you tomorrow if I could. You have already given me everything I need. You gave me safety, a home, respect, and love. What more could I possibly want? You deserve the world, Xavier insisted. I just want you, she replied, kissing him again. They stood there in the kitchen for a long time, holding each other, kissing softly, making quiet promises. Outside, the snow was melting. Spring was coming, and inside Xavier's cabin, 2 hearts that had been frozen by past pain were finally thawing, warming each other back to life. The next morning, Xavier rode into Jackson with a purpose. He went to the general store and spoke to Mrs. Patterson, the owner's wife, who served as the informal matchmaker and moral compass of the small community. He told her he needed help planning a wedding, that he had fallen in love with a woman named Natalie Jameson who had been working on his ranch, and he wanted to do everything properly. Mrs. Patterson was delighted by the news and immediately began planning, promising discretion, until Natalie was ready to come to town herself. Xavier also visited the circuit preacher, who agreed to come out to the ranch in 3 weeks' time to perform the ceremony. On his way out of town, Xavier nearly ran into Richard Coltrane. He recognized the man from Natalie's description, a stocky figure with a mean look about him, and the smell of cheap whiskey on his breath, even at 10 in the morning. Coltrane was asking shopkeepers if they had seen a dark-haired girl, his stepdaughter who had run off months ago in a storm. Xavier's jaw clenched as he listened to Coltrane tell the storekeeper that the girl was troubled, that she had stolen money from him and run off. All lies, Xavier knew, designed to turn public opinion against Natalie if she ever showed her face. Xavier said nothing, drawing no attention to himself, but his mind was working furiously. Coltrane was looking for Natalie, which meant she was not safe, not truly. Not while that man was around. He rode back to the ranch faster than he should have, and when he burst into the cabin, Natalie looked up from her sewing in alarm. What is wrong? Your stepfather is in town, asking about you, Xavier said grimly. He is telling people you stole from him, trying to make you look bad. The color drained from Natalie's face. He will not stop looking. He is too proud. He thinks I am his property. You are not his anything, Xavier said fiercely. You are your own woman, and soon you will be my wife. He cannot touch you then. But even as he said it, he knew that legal protection was not always enough in the Wyoming territory. Men like Coltrane did not care much about laws when they felt wronged. Maybe I should go, Natalie said quietly. Leave before he finds me here. I do not want to bring trouble to your door. You are not going anywhere, Xavier said, crossing to her and taking her hands. We are going to face this together. I am not letting that man hurt you again, I promise you that. Over the next few days, Xavier took precautions. He taught Natalie to shoot with his rifle, making sure she could defend herself if he was out working the ranch. He also rode over to his nearest neighbor, a tough old rancher named Hank Weaver, and explained the situation. Hank agreed to keep an eye out and send his sons over if there was any sign of trouble. The wedding preparations continued despite the shadow of Richard Coltrane hanging over them. Natalie sewed herself a simple but beautiful dress from the cream-colored fabric Xavier had bought her, adding lace trim that Mrs. Patterson had sent over. Xavier built the chicken coop as promised, filling it with laying hens he purchased from another rancher. Watching Natalie's delight as she collected her first eggs made him smile despite his worries. The day before the wedding, Xavier was mending a fence in the north pasture when he saw a rider approaching the cabin. His heart stopped when he recognized the stocky figure on the aging horse. Richard Coltrane. Xavier spurred his horse into a gallop, racing back toward the cabin, praying that Natalie would remember what he had taught her. As he got closer, he heard raised voices, then the sharp crack of a rifle shot. He nearly fell off his horse getting to the cabin door. Inside, he found Natalie holding his rifle, her hands shaking, pointing it at Richard Coltrane. The man was sprawled on the floor, clutching his leg, blood seeping between his fingers. A bottle of whiskey lay shattered beside him. He tried to grab me, Natalie said, her voice steady despite her trembling. I warned him to leave, but he would not listen. I shot the floor next to him first as a warning, but he kept coming, so I shot his leg. Xavier took in the scene and felt a surge of pride. She had defended herself. She had not let fear paralyze her. You did good, he said gently, taking the rifle from her. He turned to Coltrane, his expression cold. You made a bad mistake coming here. Coltrane snarled through his pain. That is my daughter. She is coming back with me. She is not your daughter, and she is not going anywhere with you, Xavier said flatly. We are getting married tomorrow. She is going to be my wife, and if you ever come near her again, I will not be as merciful as she was. I will not aim for your leg. He hauled Coltrane to his feet, ignoring the man's cursing. Hank, he shouted, knowing his neighbor's sons were nearby as planned. Two young men appeared at the door, and Xavier handed Coltrane over to them. Take him to the doctor in town, then to the sheriff. Tell them what happened here. He came onto my property uninvited, threatened my intended, and she defended herself. Make sure the sheriff knows that Miss Jameson wants him charged with assault and trespassing. The young men nodded and hauled Coltrane away. His protests faded into the distance. Xavier turned back to Natalie and pulled her into his arms. She was shaking now, the adrenaline wearing off, and he held her close, stroking her hair. It is over, he murmured. He cannot hurt you anymore. I was so scared, she admitted against his chest, but I remembered what you taught me. And I thought about how he had taken so much from me already. I was not going to let him take this too. I was not going to let him take you. Xavier kissed the top of her head. You were so brave. I am so proud of you. They stood there holding each other as the sun set, and Xavier knew that whatever challenges came their way, they would face them together. Natalie had found her strength and he had found his heart. Together they were unbreakable. The wedding took place the next day as planned. Word had spread about what happened with Richard Coltrane, and the community opinion had turned firmly against him. The sheriff had him locked up, and there was talk of charging him with attempted assault. More importantly, everyone now knew that Natalie was under Xavier's protection, and no one questioned her right to be there. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. The circuit preacher stood in Xavier's cabin, the space decorated with early spring wildflowers that Natalie had gathered. Mrs. Patterson and her husband attended as witnesses, along with Hank Weaver and his family. Natalie wore her cream dress and looked more beautiful than anything Xavier had ever seen. Her dark hair was pinned up with delicate curls framing her face, and her green eyes shone with happiness as she spoke her vows. "I, Natalie Jameson, take you, Xavier Ashford, to be my husband," she said clearly. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do us part." Xavier's voice was rough with emotion as he repeated his own vows, sliding a simple gold band onto her finger. He had bought it in town days ago, saving it for this moment. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed his bride with all the love and promise in his heart, and the small gathering erupted in cheers and applause. They celebrated with a simple meal that the neighbor women had helped prepare, and Xavier could not stop looking at Natalie, at the gold ring on her finger, at the joy in her face. His wife. She was his wife now, and he was her husband, and they had the rest of their lives ahead of them. That night, after the guests had left and they were alone in the cabin that was now truly their home, Xavier made love to his wife with reverence and tenderness. Natalie came to him without fear, with trust and love shining in her eyes, and they learned each other's bodies with wonder and patience. Afterward, lying tangled together in their bed, Xavier traced lazy patterns on Natalie's bare shoulder and thought about how close he had come to never knowing this happiness. If he had ridden a different path that day, if smoke had not stopped at that particular spot in the snow, he might never have found her. "What are you thinking about?" Natalie asked sleepily, her fingers drawing circles on his chest. "About how lucky I am," Xavier said. "About how you walked through a blizzard and ended up in my life." "I think luck had nothing to do with it," Natalie said softly. "I think it was meant to be. God knew I needed you and he put you in my path." Xavier kissed her forehead. "Then I am grateful to whatever force brought you to me." "I love you, Natalie Ashford." She smiled at her new name. "I love you too." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, safe and warm, two souls who had found their home in each other. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts, with Natalie's garden producing abundant vegetables that she sold in town, supplementing their income. Xavier's herd grew, and he gained a reputation as a fair and honest rancher. Richard Coltrane was convicted of assault and served 2 years in territorial prison. When he was released, he left Wyoming entirely, and they never heard from him again. The cloud that had hung over Natalie's happiness finally lifted completely. In the spring of 1880, Natalie gave birth to their first child, a healthy boy they named James, after her father. Xavier held his son with shaking hands and tears in his eyes, overwhelmed by the gift of this new life. He watched Natalie nurse their baby and felt his heart expand with more love than he had thought possible. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, whom they named Sarah. She had Xavier's dark eyes and Natalie's sweet smile, and she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. The cabin grew over the years. Xavier added rooms, building a proper bedroom for themselves and a nursery for the children. He built Natalie the porch she wanted, where she could sit and shell peas and watch the children play in the yard. The ranch became a real homestead, a place of laughter and love and growing things. Natalie taught the children to read from the books Xavier had given her all those years ago. On summer evenings, the family would sit on the porch together, Natalie reading aloud while Xavier whittled and the children played at their feet. In winter, they gathered around the fire, telling stories and roasting chestnuts. The community of Jackson grew, and Xavier and Natalie became respected members. She started a small school in town, teaching children whose parents were too busy with ranch work to educate them properly. Xavier served on the town council, helping make decisions about land use and community development. But the ranch remained their sanctuary, the place where they had built their life together from nothing. Every time Xavier rode in from working the cattle and saw the lights glowing in the windows of his home, saw Natalie waiting for him on the porch, he remembered that terrifying moment when he almost rode past a dark shape in the snow. In 1885, 7 years after he found her dying in a blizzard, Xavier came home on their anniversary to find Natalie waiting for him with a special dinner prepared. The children were spending the night with the Weavers, giving them a rare evening alone. "I have something to tell you," Natalie said after dinner, her eyes sparkling with mischief and joy. "What is it?" Xavier asked, reaching across the table to take her hand. "We are going to have another baby," she announced, "in the fall." Xavier laughed, pure happiness bubbling up from deep inside. He came around the table and pulled her into his arms, kissing her soundly. "Another blessing," he said. "I swear, woman, you have given me more joy than any man has a right to." "You saved my life," Natalie reminded him, as she had so many times over the years. "Everything I have, everything I am, started that day you found me." "No," Xavier said seriously, cupping her face in his weathered hands. "We saved each other. I was just existing before you came along, Natalie. You taught me how to really live. You gave me purpose and love and a family. You saved me just as much as I saved you." Tears shimmered in her eyes. "I love you so much. I love you too. More than words can say." They held each other in the cabin that had witnessed their love story unfold, the fire crackling cheerfully, the Wyoming wind singing outside the windows. Two people who had survived blizzards, both literal and metaphorical, who had fought for their right to be together, who had built a life of profound happiness from the ashes of past pain. The baby born that autumn was another son whom they named Thomas. He was a robust child with a loud cry in his mother's green eyes. James and Sarah doted on their baby brother, and the cabin rang with children's laughter. As the years rolled on, the Ashford family became a fixture of the Wyoming landscape. Xavier's hair turned gray at the temples, and laugh lines deepened around Natalie's eyes. Their children grew strong and capable, learning the values of hard work and kindness that their parents embodied. James, when he turned 18, took over more of the ranch operations, showing a natural talent for cattle management. Sarah, at 16, began studying to be a teacher like her mother, spending hours in the small schoolhouse in Jackson. Thomas, still young but already showing promise, had his father's quiet strength and his mother's generous heart. In 1895, on a crisp autumn evening 17 years after Xavier had found Natalie in the snow, they sat together on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The children were grown, or nearly so, the ranch was thriving, and they had built a legacy of love that would outlast them both. "Do you ever think about that night?" Natalie asked, her head resting on Xavier's shoulder. "The night you found me." "Every day," Xavier admitted. "I think about how different my life would be if I had not gone out to check the cattle that day, if smoke had not stopped, if I had been 10 minutes later." "I think about it too," Natalie said. "Sometimes I have nightmares that I am back in that snow, freezing, dying. But then I wake up and you are beside me and I remember that I am home, that I am safe, that I am loved." Xavier kissed the top of her head. "You will always be safe, you will always be loved, I promise you that." "I know," she said softly. "You have kept every promise you ever made to me, Xavier Ashford. You gave me everything I ever dreamed of, and so much more." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. Inside the house, they could hear Sarah playing the piano Xavier had bought her last year, the notes drifting out through the open windows. The cattle lowed peacefully in the distance, and somewhere an owl called, hunting in the gathering darkness. Xavier thought about the young man he had been 17 years ago, broken by war and loss, convinced he would spend his life alone on this ranch. He thought about the terrified young woman he had pulled from the snow, more dead than alive, running from horrors he could barely imagine. Look at them now. Look at what they had built together. "Thank you," he said suddenly. Natalie lifted her head to look at him. "For what?" "For being brave enough to run into that blizzard, for trusting me, for loving me, for giving me this life, this family. For every single day we have had together." Tears spilled down Natalie's cheeks, but she was smiling. "I should be thanking you. You are the one who saved me." "We saved each other," Xavier repeated, as he had so many times before. "And we will keep saving each other, every day, for the rest of our lives." He kissed her then, tender and sweet, as the last light faded from the sky and the stars blazed overhead. Two people who had walked through fire and ice and emerged stronger, whose love had been forged in adversity and tempered by time into something unbreakable. As they rose to go inside, Natalie paused at the door and looked back at the vast Wyoming landscape, at the mountains dark against the horizon, at the land that had nearly killed her and then given her everything. "Thank you," she whispered to the wind, to fate, to God, to whatever force had guided her feet through that blizzard 17 years ago. Then she turned and followed her husband inside, into the warmth and light and love that filled their home. The door closed behind them, shutting out the cold night. But inside, the fire burned bright and warm, as it had every night since Xavier brought his frozen bride home. The flames danced and crackled, bearing witness to a love story that had started in the depths of winter and bloomed into a lifetime of spring. Years later, when Xavier and Natalie were old and gray, their children grown with families of their own, they would sit on that same porch and tell their grandchildren the story of how they met. About the blizzard and the desperate flight and the miraculous rescue. About learning to love and trust again after trauma. About building a life together one day at a time. The grandchildren would listen with wide eyes, finding it hard to imagine their dignified grandmother as a desperate young woman fleeing through a deadly storm, or their strong grandfather as a lonely rancher who almost rode past the love of his life. But Xavier and Natalie would share a look across the porch, a look full of memory and understanding and unshakable love, and they would know. They would always know how close they had come to missing each other, how precious every day together truly was. Their love story became part of the family legacy, passed down through generations. The ranch stayed in the Ashford family, worked by their descendants who never forgot the foundation of courage and devotion on which it was built. The cabin where it all began was preserved, becoming a cherished family landmark. In the end, Xavier and Natalie Ashford had what everyone hopes for but few achieve. A love that lasted a lifetime, a family that honored their memory, and the knowledge that they had truly saved each other in every way that mattered. They had taken the worst that life could throw at them and transformed it into something beautiful and lasting. When Xavier passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, Natalie held his hand and whispered the words she had said to him countless times over their nearly 5 decades together. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for everything." And though he could no longer answer, she knew in her heart what he would have said. "Thank you for being there to be found. Thank you for making my life complete. Thank you for being mine." Natalie followed him just 2 years later, and they were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a sky as vast and blue as the one that had witnessed their first meeting. Their headstone bore simple words that told their story, together through every storm. Their children and grandchildren gathered at the graveside, tears falling freely, but also smiling through their grief, because Xavier and Natalie had shown them all what true love looked like. They had proven that even from the darkest moments, beautiful things could grow. That courage and kindness and steadfast devotion could overcome any obstacle. The wind blew across the Wyoming landscape, carrying with it the whisper of their love story, a tale that would be told and retold for generations. The story of a woman who walked through a blizzard to escape her stepfather, and the cowboy who found her near frozen and gave her not just her life back, but a love that would echo through eternity. And though their physical forms were gone, their love remained, woven into the very fabric of the land they had worked together, present in the eyes of their descendants, alive in the memories of all who knew them. They had created something that death could not touch, a legacy of love that would endure as long as the mountains stood and the wind sang across the plains of Wyoming. The story was complete, the circle closed, and it was beautiful.